theoretical conference takes place at a moment pregnant with both danger and opportunity. Across the global south, the working class and its vanguard parties are confronted with burning questions. What is the correct character of our national struggles? What is their dialectical connection to the global anti-imperialist front? How do we ensure that our revolution grows organically from the specific contradiction of our society rather than mechanically imitate foreign models divorced from our material realities? Viva, comrades, viva. Viva. The CPMK has taken up this question not as a theoretical luxury, but as a matter of revolutionary necessity. For a party that does not theorize correctly cannot act correctly, and a party that does not act correctly cannot liberate its people. We are honored to co-organize this conference with the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, with the Communist Party of the Philippines at its core. Your revolutionary path of a protracted people's war, class struggle, and anti-imperialist resistance offers profound lessons for us as we seek to wage our own battle on African soil. Long live CPP, long live. Long live. Comrades, the theme of this conference, Comprado and Bureaucrat Capitalists in the Neo-Colonies, is not academic exercise. It reflects the living, breathing class enemies who exploit our people daily. In the fields, in the informal settlement, in the markets, in the corridors of government, and yes, sometimes even within the party. When a snake enters your homestead, it matters not whether it slithers through the front door or the fence. What matters that it bites. And the comprado bureaucrat class has beaten the Kenyan masses far too long. But to heal, comrades, we must name the disease. To strike, we must see the enemy clearly. That is why we gather, to sharpen our swords of theory, to clean our guns of ideology, and to prepare for a political battle. For the fourth theoretical conference is not a tea party, it is a war council. A war against opportunism, liberalism, feudal backwardness, and imperialist domination. A war to settle accounts with the past and chart the revolutionary road to socialism. Long live socialism. Long live. This conference, comrades, affirms the ideological rebirth of our party. Following the first wave of rectification, this is not the Kenya of 10 years ago. This is not the CPMK of ideological fog and revisionist compromise. The waters have stirred. The lines have drawn, the opportunists unmasked. He who learns but does not correct himself is digging a grave with his own pen, and we, comrades, shall not dig our own graves. This conference is a decisive step in the second wave of rectification, a necessary cleansing, a reaffirmation that this party will not advance on the shaky foundation of revisionism, petty bourgeois liberalism, or cowardly deviationism. We shall not carry forward the poisoned legacy of the Gang of Two, Mwandawirum Ganga and Benedict Washira, whose betrayal of democratic centralism and abandonment of class struggle inflicted grievous harm on our great party and the Kenyan revolutionary movement. Down with opportunism, down. These sellout comrades, under the mask of intellectualism, wedded themselves to the comprado class. They distorted the party line to place NGOs and foreign embassies and dragged our legacy and sacrifices of our martyrs deep in mud. Now they are stinking with opportunists and hated with the Kenyan masses. Though defeated, we must never forget their betrayal. They championed the electoral illusions while liquidating class struggle. But we say today, never again. Their deviations shall not be repeated, and the opportunism shall not return through the back door in the new clothes. Our ideological vigilance must remain unrelenting. We must expose and defeat all forms of opportunism. The left infantilism that rejects strategy in favor of posturing. The Trotskyist idealism that scorns national liberation. The liberal economism that substitutes reform for revolution. And the bourgeois feminism that ignores class while claiming to speak for women. The imperialist NGO ideologues and the hopeless, perverted champions of politics of no polity. The Kenyan working class shall only march forward when its party is guided by ideological firmness, programmatic clarity, and organization discipline. Long live CPMK, long live. Long live. And I quote Mao Zedong, "A revolution is not a dinner party. It is an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. Long live Mao Zedong, long live.
Long live.
And to overthrow a class, we must first see it clearly. Now, let us look at the comprado and bureaucratic capitalist class. Comrades, let us now return to the very theme of this conference, comprado and bureaucrat capitalism in the new colonies. The enemy must not be abstract shadow. It must be identified, named, and studied with scientific clarity. In Kenya, the bourgeois is not a national character. It is not a revolutionary. It is not productive. It is a servant class, a comprado bureaucratic elite that survives only by licking the boots of imperialism. Let us begin by defining some of these terms. Comprado capitalism is the economic arm of foreign domination. Comprados are intermediaries. They are local agents of foreign capital, tasked not with building, but with the managing subsidiaries of transnational corporations. Their duty is to ensure that the pipeline of profit flows unbroken from the sweat of the Kenyan workers to the vaults of the European and American capital. Down with the United States imperialism, down. These comprados may not always be seen in parliament, but they rule nonetheless, from boardrooms, investment conferences, and the chambers of commerce. Their task is singular, to extract surplus and channel to their imperialist masters. They do not build factories. They build bank accounts. They do not invest in nations. They traffic in its ruins. Bureaucratic capitalism, on the other hand, comrades, is the political instrument of imperialist control. Here, we find rented politicians, state technocrats, and military officers whose purpose is to protect imperialist interests through machinery of the state. They do not govern. They administer imperialism affairs. They wear African faces, but they speak the language of the foreign capital. In Kenya, comrades, these two classes are not parallel. They are twisted rope. The comprado and the bureaucrat capitalists are often the same person, owning a logistic firm on one hand, sitting on a government committee on the other hand, controlling real estate empires while passing land policies, brokering imperialist loan by the day and imposing austerity measures by the night. A man who chases two antelope at once will lose both. But the comprado bureaucrat does not chase. They are carried. They serve one master, imperialism. For the revolutionary, this unity of economic and political power in the same class is not a curiosity. It is a strategic fact, comrades. It means that Kenya is ruled by a single reactionary bloc with no patriotic wing, no progressive wing, and no capacity for national development. This class must be overthrown, not reformed. It must be disarmed, not debated. It must be exposed, isolated, smashed through the class struggle and armed revolution. Comrades, no class appears from thin air. Even traitors have a backstory. To understand the comprado bureaucrat class in Kenya, we must return to the final decades of British colonialism. As the sun set on the British Empire, the imperialists prepare a new arrangement to protect their interest. They knew that direct colonial rule was becoming untenable. The Mau Mau War had ignited the prior fire. Across the continent, anti-colonial sentiments were swelling. So the British financial capital did what all imperialists do. It negotiated a false independence. But to rule indirectly, they needed agents. They needed a native elite, educated enough to be respected, cowardly enough to obey, and greedy enough to sell out their people. Thus was born the Kenyan comprado class, lawyers, chiefs, businessmen, and university-trained sons of the petty bourgeoisie, plucked from the colonial civil service and the military. They were given land, title, and contracts. They were told, rule in our name, and we shall reward you. Alongside them rose the bureaucratic class, former colonial clerks, administrators, and army officers, now given suits and briefcases, armed with foreign degrees and foreign debts. Did they oppose colonialism? No, they inherited it. Did they reverse land alienation? No, they deepened it. Did they industrialize Kenya? No, they made it a warehouse for imports. Their accumulation was not through production, but through state contracts, foreign aid, corruption, and plunder. They sold Kenya not at once, but over and over again, at donor conferences, in IMF meetings, and in the backroom real estate deals. They enriched themselves through the parasitic appropriation of surplus value produced by the Kenyan workers and peasants. They crushed every movement that dared resist them. The workers' strikes of the 1960s, the peasant revolts in the Rift Valleys, and the radical university movements of 1980s. Comrades, let us call this class by their true name, a comprado bureaucratic dictatorship in the service of imperialism. Now let us weigh to some theoretical foundation, comrades.
Down with imperialist puppets, down.
Down. I now turn to a critical component of this key speech and to look at some of the theoretical foundations. We ground our understanding in the revolutionary teachings of Lenin and Mao, who demonstrated that feudalism and its persistent in semi-feudal forms remains a central barrier to socialist transformation in the new colonial world. Mao in particular emphasized the necessity of a Agrarian revolution as a precondition for people's democracy and socialism. Long live Chairman Mao, long live.
Long live.
The questions of feudal remnants and their role in revolutionary process has been dealt with extensively in the works of Lenin and Mao Zedong. Both recognize that in society dominated by imperialism like Kenya, the path to socialism must pass through the national democratic revolution that dismantles the pre-capitalist structures, particularly feudal and semi-feudal relations in the countryside. Let us now embark to Lenin. Lenin's writings on the agrarian question, particularly the development of the capitalist in Russia and the two tactics of social democracy in the democratic revolution, identified feudal relations, specifically landlordism and peasant bondage, as a barrier to development of the productive forces and the consolidation of the proletariat at a revolutionary class. Lenin argued correctly that the backward and the semi-feudal society like Kenya, the democratic revolution must aim at the elimination of the feudal landholding and the redistribution of the land to the peasantry, the destruction of the political power of the landlord, and the democratic reorganization of the countryside under the new class alliance between the workers and the peasants. Long live the basic alliance of the workers and the peasants. Although Lenin worked within the context of Tsarist Russia, the method he developed is applicable to the neo-colonial society like Kenya, where the colonial bourgeoisie replaced the aristocracy and the semi-feudal land relations were preserved or mutated under comprado capitalism. On Mao, Mao's contribution deepens Lenin's theory by applying it to the colonial and semi-colonial society dominated by imperialism. In revolutionary China, Mao identified the countryside as the base of the revolution and recognized semi-feudal and semi-colonial character of the Chinese society. In works like the report on the investigation of the peasant movement in Hunan and on the new democracy, Mao explained, semi-feudalism is maintained through a fusion of landlordism, imperialism, and comprado capitalism. The peasantry, particularly the poor and the landed peasants, are the main forces of the revolution. The revolutionary task is to overthrow both imperialism and feudalism as a unified process through the people's democratic dictatorship. Mao's method is critical for understanding the Kenyan situation today. The colonial state, far from dismantling feudalism, restructured it to serve settler and imperialist interests. Post-independence, the comprado state retained these structures, allowing landlordism, patriarchal domination, and customary authority to survive under a capitalist facade. Semi-feudalism in the new economy. A semi-feudal system is not feudalism in the classic form, but a hybrid mode of production where pre-capitalist form of exploitation like unpaid family labor, rent in kind, and patron-client ties persist. The peasantry is not fully proletariat or integrated into capitalist production. Land relations remain based on custom power and lineage rather than the market of the formal legal rights. This hybrid system is actively preserved by imperialism because it ensures cheap food, docile labor reserves, and political control through traditional elites. In Kenya, this is seen in the persistence of customary land tenure system, landlord-squatter relations, unpaid family labor and subsistent family, traditional authority structures embedded in political systems. These are not accidental. They are essential tools of neo-colonial control which must be thrown as part of the NDR. Long live the NDR, long live.
Long live.
Comrades, no revolution is born in a vacuum. The flames that rise in the Kenyan countryside are fanned by the winds from other struggles, from China, Vietnam, and the Philippines and Russia. Yet, as Fanon warned, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. We study this revolution not to copy-paste them, but to learn from their universality while adapting to our particularity. the Chinese Revolution, Agrarian power, and the mass line. Mao Zedong report on the peasant movement in Hunan taught us that the peasants are not naturally revolutionary. They become revolutionary through organization and ideological transformation. The Chinese Communist Party applied the mass line from the masses to the masses, building base areas, overthrowing landlord, and constructing new democratic power rooted in the peasants' organ. Mao showed that, 1, armed revolution must begin in the countryside. Land reform is the axis of mass mobilization, and patriarchy must be smashed through Revolutionary Women's Association. Kenyan countryside too is a primary theater of contradiction, but unlike China, we contend with settler remnants, donor-funded NGOs, and customary law manipulated by comprado chiefs. Our peasant revolution must address these specificities without abandoning the mass line and the necessity of the revolutionary violence. Long live the revolutionary violence, long live. Lenin's 2 tactics of social democracy clarify that the bourgeois in the colonial and semi-feudal society cannot complete the democratic revolution. It is the proletariat in alliance with the peasantry that must carry the banner of the bourgeois democratic task: land reform, democratic rights, and the national sovereignty while preparing for socialism. Comrades, in Kenya, there is no patriotic bourgeoisie, no industrial capitalist, only a comprado bureaucratic elite clinging to imperialist life support. Therefore, the working class must lead, not tail, and the poor peasants must be mobilized, not pacified. For Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh built bases areas in the countryside, combining armed resistance, mass education, and land redistribution under the People's Democratic Government. Their success teaches us that political power must be built before state power is seized. Rural administration must be revolutionized from below. Imperialism can be defeated through united front strategy and not through elite compromise. Comrades, in Kenya, we must also build dual power in the countryside. Village committees that contest not only landlordism, but chiefs, police, religious landlords, and NGO manipulators. For the Philippines, the Communist Party of Philippines, through the National Democratic Revolution and the New People's Army, has waged a protracted people's war for over 50 years. Long live the New People's Army, long live.
Long live.
Through the painstaking social investigation, political education, and mass organizing, they have advanced a 2-stage land reform while confronting the comprado bureaucratic violence and US imperialism. From the Philippines, comrades, we learn rectification is indispensable to correct ideological deviation. Summing up and criticism, self-criticism are vital to political unity. Class struggle cannot be substituted by electoral illusion or legalist compromise. The Kenya Revolution must also develop its own strategy of prolonged mass resistance, rural encirclement, ideological consolidation, guided not by imitation, by the specific analysis. The stream lands from the river, but must cut its own course. Comrades, to introduce the next part, I would like to say that without the complete and comprehensive understanding of the Kenyan society, our revolution shall surely win. This explains why the party takes hours to analyze the Kenyan society. To fully expose the enemy, we must grasp the historical and the structural roots of the Kenyan semi-feudal domination. Feudal relations in Kenya are not colonial inventions. Prior to British conquest, certain pre-capitalist relations of the production existed across various ethnic formations. Some communities had established hierarchies of tribute and labor extraction, with elders or chiefs holding communal control over land and cattle. However, these relations are embedded in the social reciprocity and communal obligation. The feudal relations in Kenya had existed even before the period of colonialism. However, colonialism has entrenched them even further. The ownership of land continues to be used to extract surplus from the peasantry. The most common feature of feudal rent has been rent in kind. In areas like Taita Taveta, peasants who had no land holding were given land by the landlord class, and at the end of the harvest, they will give part of their harvest to the landlord as rent in kind. This feature has continued up to date. Colonialism, comrade, did not eliminate this relation. It actually weaponized them. British imperialism institutionalized feudalism through forceful land alienation. The 1915 Crown Land Ordinance declared all waste and unoccupied land to be the property of the Crown. Over 7 million acres of land of most fertile land stretching from the White Highlands of Uasin Gishu to the lush escarpment of Kericho and Nyeri was seized and handed over to the British settlers. The African population was forcibly displaced into the native reserves, overcrowded, underdeveloped, and administratively policed territories designed to contain, control, and exploit. There, a distorted version of a traditional authority was imposed. Chiefs became instruments of indirect rule. Customary law was codified not to preserve culture, but to enforce colonial domination. Taxation, especially the hat and the poll tax, was introduced not for the public good, but to coerce African labor into settler farms and colonial infrastructure. With African economies destroyed, the peasantry was made to pay taxes with wages earned through exploitative labor or the forced sale of produce at artificially low prices. Comrades, this expropriation generated a dual agrarian economy. One capitalist and exported-oriented, this is settler estate, and the other subsistence-based, overpopulated and underdeveloped African reserve. This created the material base for semi-feudal relations within African areas, particularly as a response to land scarcity and proletarialization. The colonial economy fused feudal extraction with capitalist accumulation, resulting into a semi-feudal, semi-colonial mode of production. With formal independence in 1963, comrades, the Comprado ruling class inherited the colonial land regime through market-based land distribution. For example, the Million Acre Scheme, largely funded by Britain and World Bank. Land was not redistributed to the landless peasants, but instead purchased by African elites, civil servants, politicians, former chiefs, and businessmen, that forming a post-colonial African landlord class. This class mirrored settler patterns of landholding, absentee ownership, leasing to tenants, and accumulation through title deeds. The government redistributed land to Africans in ways that entrenched inequalities that were created by colonialism. The Comprado landlord class remains tightly linked to the global finance capital, using land titles as collateral for loans and speculation, not production. By 1980, comrades, 20% of large farms control over 80% of high potential agricultural land, mostly in Rift Valley. In contrast, smallholders, majority, occupied less than 20% of such land, often fragmented and overused. The landlord class was not born of toil. It was created through state patronage, corruption, and comprado accumulation. Its members did not take the land. They extracted rent in kind, rent in cash, labor dues, and usurious interest from poor peasantries. Comrades, the introduction of the individual land tenure through the Land Adjudication Registration Act of 1950 to 70s under the Swanton Plan 1954 created the juridical foundation for the landlord class. Land registration was used to legitimize power of elites and dispossessed communities. Land was transformed into a commodity and a source of rent extraction, fueling class differentiation within the African communities. Former communal land became privately held, enabling land grabbing by elites, emergence of petty landlords who leased land to squatters and tenants at exploitative terms, and expansion of absentee ownership. Even today, Kenya's land redistribution is among the most unequal globally. According to the official estimate, less than 20% of Kenyans own over 80% of arable land, with a handful of families, many tied to post-independent administration, holding tens of thousands of acres each. In places like Taita Taveta and Laikipia, landless peasants today remain locked in sharecropping arrangement, obligated to surrender a portion of their harvest to absentee landlords. This land monopoly remains the backbone of the Kenyan semi-feudal economy. It blocks productive forces, suppresses peasant initiative, and produces rural poverty. It is not a relic of the past. It is a present system of class rule. The cow that feeds in your garden is not your friend. And the landlord class, though it may wear the African skin and preach Pan-Africanism, feeds the suffering of the peasantry. Who then is the landlord class in Kenya today, comrades? These are settler remnants, big landlords, land speculators, churches and trust foundation, traditional chiefs and elders. And what are their modes of exploitation? Rent in kind, rent in cash, sharecropping, debt bondage, deplorable labor conditions on flour, tea, and sugarcane estate, tithes and churches levies demanded from the rural women cultivators. These exploitative relations do not only oppress the peasantry, they distort the entire national economy. They prevent agricultural modernization, deepen food security, and compel rural-urban migration into slums and informal work. In this context, semi-feudalism is not a cultural residue, comrades. It is a strategic barrier to socialist transformation. Comrades, if we are to uproot semi-feudalism, we must identify the dual anchors that secure its persistence: land monopoly and patriarchy. These two forces are not merely ideological vestiges, they are material systems of domination. Let us be clear, the monopoly of land ownership by settler remnants, comprado elite and bureaucratic capitalists is the structural cornerstone of Kenya's agrarian underdevelopment. This monopoly expressed through large idle estate owned by politicians and military elites, foreign-owned agribusiness in Laikipia, Naivasha, Kericho and parts of Taita, evictions of indigenous communities from the forest lands under the pretext of conservation, land speculation driven by capital accumulation and not food production, land grabbing mafias operating within the protection of the state. In places like Coast, comrades, vast swaths remain under the colonial era trust titles controlled by absentee landlords who collect rents without labor, while indigenous people live as tenants and squatters on their ancestral land. This is not land issue, it is a land war. And the landlord class is not a development partner, it is a class enemy. A man who owns all the river forbids you from fetching water. Alongside land monopoly stands the patriarchy, not as a cultural inertia, but as a system of gendered class rule. It manifests in three fronts. It manifests culturally through women are denied land inheritance under the customary law, marriage system commodify women through dowry and bride payment prices, single mothers and widows are dispossessed in clan-based inheritance disputes. Politically, women are systematically excluded from decision-making in the villages, elders, councils, land boards, and even many cooperatives. Women roles are reduced to development project rather than revolutionary mobilization. Economically, women form the majority of unpaid agricultural laborers. They perform reproductive labor like cooking, fetching water, caring for children without compensation, without rest, and without social recognition. Women are last in the queue for credit, land titles, agricultural inputs, and political representation. This is not merely sexism. It is gendered exploitation rooted in feudal and capitalist relations. Let us say it plainly. The agrarian question is also a women's question. To smash feudalism, we must smash patriarchy. To build socialism, we must emancipate women not as a special interest, but a revolutionary class force. Long live the working class women, long live.
Long live.
Comrades, clarity in class analysis is not academic. It is essential for revolutionary practice. The countryside is not homogeneous. It is divided by the ownership, by labor relations, and by class interest. Stratification of the Kenyan peasantry. We have the poor peasants, lower middle peasants, and rich peasants. The landlord and the bureaucrats, we have the small landholders, the big landholders, the bureaucratic capitalists, and the comprado bourgeoisie. This is not a rural economy. It is actually a class battlefield. The relationship of production, who owns, who works, who profits. The means of production is concentrated in the hands of the landlord, the comprado and the bureaucrats, land, machinery, inputs and transport. Labor supplied by the poor peasantry, mainly women, and it's always manual, unpaid or underpaid or even precarious. Surplus appropriation realized through rent, crop levies, interest on informal loans, and price suppression by middlemen and exporters. These are not incidental contradictions. They are the material foundation of semi-feudalism, capitalism in the countryside. Comrades, if the countryside is where the contradictions are sharpest, the countryside must also be where the revolution roots itself most firmly. The agrarian program of the National Democratic Revolution must be articulated along two axes. Minimum program, lower land rate and abolish usury, increase farm gate prices and end market exploitation, promote collective farming, secure customary and communal land rights, legal and political support for peasant struggles. For the maximum program, we call land to the tiller, abolish the landlord class, establish the people's councils in the countryside, mechanize and plan agricultural production, socialize production. What's to be done to advance the Kenyans NDR, comrades? As per the resolution of the Second National Congress, the party has published the following documents as a guide for action: the social class analysis of the Kenyan society, the basis of the United Front, and the program of the United Front as an extrapolation of the party's minimum program. We still need to deepen our understanding of the Kenyan society in the most complete and comprehensive way. Comrades, to move forward, we must look backward, not with nostalgia, but armed with our revolutionary living science of Marxism. The Communist Party Marxist Kenya, with the Central Organizing Committee at its core, must now undertake a comprehensive summing up document, a collective analysis of party's ideological, political, and organizational journey. The SU must, therefore, expose past errors and deviations, especially the liquidationist period under the revisionist leadership of the Gang of Two, Benedict Washira and Mandawiri Mganga. Clarify the party's IPO line, ideological, political, and organization. Analyze class forces at each stage of party's history. Assess campaigns, cadre development, and mass work and alliances with the honesty, not defensiveness. Reaffirm the democratic centralism as the bulwark against opportunism. And finally, situate the party's development within the broader revolutionary legacy of Kenya, from the Mau Mau to post-Moi's uprising. The summing up is not a report, comrade. It is a weapon, a document to consolidate the second wave of rectification and a guide party building, united front work, and revolutionary strategy. A house built without inspecting the soil shall collapse in the rains. The summing up is our inspection, our soil study, and our foundation. Comrades, correct strategy flows from correct analysis, and correct analysis flows from correct social investigation and class analysis. To deepen our seeker, the party has sufficiently answered the most important questions as below. What is the mode of production in Kenya? It is a semi-feudal, semi-colonial mode, where capitalist relations coexist with feudal structures, and where production is disarticulated from national development, serving imperialist market and not people's need. Who are the class forces? Friends of our revolution are the poor peasants, the landless quarters, the rural proletariat, the urban informal workers, the revolutionary youth and women, patriotic professional aligned with the NDR. Who are the enemies, comrades? The imperialist bourgeoisie, the comprado capitalist, the bureaucratic capitalist, and the landlord class. Who are the middle forces? We have the middle peasants, the radical students, teachers, and health workers. What are the class contradictions, comrades? The principal contradictions is between the Kenyan masses and imperialism mediated by the comprado bureaucratic class. The secondary contradiction remains between the landlord and the tenants, between the women and the patriarchal institution, between the youth and unemployment, between ethnic groups manipulated by the ruling class. Seeker is not only theoretical, it must be applied through cadre investigation in the rural zones, through mass meetings and surveys, through mapping of land ownership, gender roles and production relations, through cultural studies of ideology, language and resistance. Our great party, as the general staff of the Kenyan working class, must now invest in people's research brigades trained in Marxist methodology to uncover the truth from the masses and return it to them in the form of revolution. No investigation, no right to speak. That is Mao. Comrades, to advance the national democratic revolution, the United Front is an essential instrument under the absolute leadership of the party, which serves as the general staff of the revolution. The working class, as the decisive revolutionary force, must be firmly consolidated and politically organized to lead the UF. In this alliance, the peasantry, it's the most reliable ally, joins the proletariat in forming the basic alliance that drives the revolutionary process forward. The agrarian revolution cannot be won by isolated struggles. It requires building a revolutionary united front rooted in the worker-peasant alliance and encompassing all progressive classes strata and the forces willing to oppose imperialism and feudalism. This is not a coalition of grievances, comrades. It is an instrument of class war. Its goal is not reformist dialogue, but strategic mobilization to isolate and destroy the comprado bureaucrat law. The revolutionary united front must draw in peasant women cooperative resisting patriarchal exclusion, rural youth brigades confronting landlessness, drug abuse and employment, casual workers on tea and sugarcane estate, dispossessed communities from Mao to Lamu, and radical teachers, nurses and extension workers abandoned by the neoliberal state. These are not civil society partners, comrades. They are class forces in motion. Their mobilization must be led by the party, guided by the program of the NDR, and elevated from the defensive protest to strategic revolutionary action. Let it be known, comrades, one class alone cannot make the revolution. But when the working class leads, when the poor peasantry rises, and when the women rebel, when the youth agitate, and the party unites them all, no force on earth can stop a people's determined to free themselves. As our people reminds us, one finger cannot kill a louse, but 5 clanged together become a fist. Comrades, the Agrarian revolution is not the end of the struggle, it is a bridge to socialism. The destruction of feudal relations clears the ground. But it is through the people's democracy that we begin to construct a new society. This bridge is built on 3 pillars: planned production and socialized agriculture, democratic power at the base, cultural and ideological revolution. This is not an electoral dream, comrades. It is a revolutionary process built on the peasant mobilization, party leadership, and proletariat ideology. Without a people's army, the people have nothing, Comrade Mao. Without a agrarian revolution, socialism has no soil in which to grow. Comrades, theory must become practice, and practice must be guided by revolutionary clarity. The Communist Party Marxist must carry forward 5 immediate and concrete revolutionary tasks: deploy cadres to the countryside, lead and support the land struggles, expand revolutionary education in rural areas, organize revolutionary women and the youth struggles, popularize the agrarian program of the NDI. The final declaration, comrades, this address has exposed the class nature of the Kenyan crisis, a comprado bureaucratic dictatorship sustained by imperial finance, feudal social relations, and patriarchal oppression. We have declared that Kenya is not free. It is a semi-feudal, semi-colonial, neo-colony. We have shown that the countryside is not backward, it is betrayed. We have affirmed that the agrarian question is not peripheral, it is central. We have insisted that the women's question is not secondary, it is a battlefront. And we have committed ourselves to a program for the land revolution, class mobilization, and socialist transformation. We say to imperialism, you shall not rule in peace. We say to the comprado class elite, your time is up. We say to the peasantry, the working class, and the oppressed, organize, rise, and take what it is yours. When the drum beat changes, the dancers must change their steps. The drum beat has changed. The party has awakened. The future is ours. We dare to fight for it. Let us carry the red banner of Marxism and Leninism into every field, every village, every cooperative, every home. Let us plant the seeds of socialism in the fertile soil of resistance. Let us be the fire that consumes the feudal relics. Comrades, let us be the wind that spreads the call of liberation. Forward ever towards socialism, towards liberation, towards victory. Long live the poor peasants of Kenya. Long live.
Long live.
Long live proletariat internationalism. Long live.
Long live.
Long live the Agrarian revolution. Long live.
Long live.
Long live the Communist Party Marxist. Long live.
Long live.
Wafanyikazi, nyakua mashamba.
Nyakua.
Wafanyikazi, komboa chakula.
Komboa.
Wafanyikazi, pigania uhuru.
Pigania.
Thank you.